Let us see the story of a great scientific battle. A battle where one courageous scientist took on an entire religious institution and challenged it. This is a story not of science alone, but of courage, ego, and the price of truth. It is a story of a scientist, an Italian scientist called Galileo Galilei. In the early 1600s, when the night sky was thought to be still, perfect ceiling of God's creation, an old man in Florence lifted a small brass tube towards the heavens and saw something that would shake the world. That man was Galileo Galilei, a mathematician, dreamer, and rebel spirit. The tube was the telescope, a simple invention, but one that could topple empires of thought. He proposed a very dangerous idea, a discovery that changed the world. It began innocently enough. Galileo, always curious, pointed his telescope at the moon and gasped. The moon was not smooth and perfect as the church and Aristotle had long taught. It had mountains and valleys, shadows and scars. A world, not a divine lamp, as the church said. He turned the telescope to Jupiter and saw four tiny moons revolving around it. Revolving, yes, around Jupiter and not the Earth. The Earth, which everyone, from peasants to popes, believed to be the unmoving center of the universe. Each observation whispered the same shocking truth that the Earth moves, and the Earth is not the center of the solar system. A Polish astronomer before him, named Nicholas Copernicus, had suggested that the sun stood still while the planets orbited around it. This was suggested by Copernicus decades earlier. It was a radical, elegant idea, but very few took it seriously. Until Galileo, armed with his telescope and his Italian wit, he began to prove it. He published his findings in plain Latin, in plain Italian instead of Latin, so that even ordinary people could read them. And they did. They talked, debated, and argued. Some laughed, and others prayed. The church, however, did not laugh. The Vatican reacted. In those days, the Catholic Church was not just a religious institution, it was the intellectual authority of Europe. It decided not only how to reach heaven, but what heaven itself was like. The scriptures said that earth was fixed. To suggest otherwise was to suggest that scriptures were wrong. In 1616, Galileo was summoned by the Roman Inquisition, the same body that had burnt heretics a century before, the same body that burnt a scientist called Bruno alive. The church warned him, do not hold or teach the idea that the earth moves around the sun. Galileo bowed his head and kept his silence for a while, but then came out with a book which mocked the Pope. Years passed. A new Pope, Urban VIII, came to power. He was educated, even friendly to Galileo, encouraged the old scientist thought that perhaps the time has come. In 1632, Galileo published his masterpiece, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. It was written as a conversation between three men, one defending Aristotle, one supporting Copernicus, and one moderating. But the Aristotelian character, the one defending the earth centered view, which was supported by church, came across as a fool in the book. He came across as a stubborn old man named Simplicio. Unfortunately, Simplicio's arguments resembled things that the Pope himself had said. Urban VIII was furious. He had tolerated Galileo's science, but he would not tolerate mockery. And the trial began. The Inquisition struck again. In 1633, the frail, nearly blind Galileo was brought before the church judges in Rome. They accused him of heresy, of teaching ideas contrary to the word of God. Galileo, trembling before the most powerful institution in Europe, insisted that he had only written a dialogue and not a declaration. But it didn't matter. Under threat of torture and excommunication, he was forced to kneel and read his confession aloud. This confession was an apology. He said, I, Galileo Galilei, abjure, curse, and detest the error and hearsay of the motion of the earth. He signed it, an old man with a shaking hand. The legend says that as he rose, he muttered under his breath, and yet it moves. The silence spoke louder than words. Galileo was sentenced not to the dungeons but to house arrest for the rest of his life. He was forbidden to teach, forbidden to write, forbidden to even think aloud. But in the quiet of his home, he continued to work. He studied tides, motion, pendulums, laying the groundwork for Newton's laws that would soon follow. He died in 1642. The same year, another child was born in England, Isaac Newton, who would finish the revolution Galileo began. Centuries later, even the church had to admit that it had been wrong. In 1992, more than 350 years after Galileo's trial, Pope John Paul II officially cleared his name. But by then, the damage was done, and so was the awakening. Galileo had not only changed astronomy, he had changed the way humanity thought. He had proved that truth could not be silenced, even if the man speaking it could. Galileo's story is not science versus religion, it is curiosity versus fear, reason versus authority. He looked at the stars and refused to see what he was told to see. He trusted his eyes, his mind, and his courage. And so, when the night sky glows above us, full of planets, moons, and distant suns, it whispers the same words that this old man once whispered to power. And yet, it moves. Thank you so much for listening.